A Veyari warlord's head exploded before the sound reached his men. 1 second he was boasting into the broadcast drone about Earth's inferiority, and the next, his helmet shattered like glass from the inside, sending fragments of alien alloys spinning into the dust. The silence that followed was not victory, but confusion. The rest of the squad looked around, their facial plates glowing with alarm, trying to understand what had happened. There was no warning, no trail, not even a hiss of incoming fire. Just a sharp snap, half a second late, echoing across the valley. Somewhere beyond the tree line, someone on Earth had just spoken with a bullet. And everyone who heard it suddenly forgot how to laugh. The day had started with mockery. The Veyari broadcast came down in polished universal common, interrupting everything from news networks to car radios, with their infamous voice transmission repeating across every channel. It declared Earth primitive, Earth weapons obsolete, Earth soldiers laughable. The broadcast tower, hastily erected in the middle of a public park, stood 50 meters tall and emitted a blue pulse every few seconds, as if to keep time with the humiliation. A group of armored Veyari soldiers, towering and confident, stomped through what was once a rural mountain town. Their boots cracked pavement and flower pots alike. They weren't looking for resistance. They were looking for sport. They found the mayor, an old man who had stayed behind to protect the town records, and filmed themselves burning his documents before beaming him up for rehabilitation. Then they destroyed the water tower and replaced it with a dome-like scanner. One of the aliens even urinated into the town well, recording the moment and labeling it planetary dominance. These weren't conquerors with strategy. These were bullies with starships. But not all old men had left the mountains. On a ridge above the valley, nestled between jagged rocks and stubborn pine trees, was a faded wood shack with no electricity and no signal. Inside sat an older man in a flannel shirt, his face weathered and quiet, polishing a bolt-action rifle with movements so careful they bordered on reverence. Next to him on the table lay rounds the size of small carrots, each hand loaded, balanced, and tipped with a unique metal sheen. The man hadn't spoken to another person in 6 months. He didn't need to. His name hadn't been spoken over a radio in years. But when it was only one word. Rook. A knock at the door didn't startle him. It was too soft. It didn't match the arrogance of soldiers or the rhythm of a hiker. He opened it and found a girl no older than 19, covered in dust, her left eye bruised and a resistance armband wrapped around her arm. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply said, "They've taken the valley. They're hunting civilians." Her voice trembled, but her words didn't. "We have no marksmen left. They laughed at our weapons, sir. They laughed at the scope." Rook didn't answer right away. He turned back toward his workbench and picked up a long rectangular case. He opened it and stared at the rifle inside. Its wood was scarred from desert deployments. Its steel barrel bore serial numbers that had been scratched off and then etched again by hand. He lifted it slowly, set it across his lap, and ran a cloth across its barrel. "You see that helmet they're wearing?" he asked without looking at her. She nodded. He continued, "There's a flaw in the left temple. About the size of a fly. Their head turns, that flaw disappears. You miss your chance, it's gone." The girl swallowed hard. "Can you hit it?" she asked. He didn't answer. He stood up, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and walked outside. 10 minutes later, the Veyari warlord standing atop their communications tower roared with laughter as he spoke into the floating broadcast drone, taunting the planet's defenders. That was when Rook exhaled. The girl watched through old binoculars, struggling to see what he was aiming at. There was no scope on the rifle, just iron sights and instinct. Rook adjusted the dial on the side, one he'd carved himself decades ago. He muttered, "Wind soft. Helmets tilted. That'll do." The shot rang out with a whisper. Half a second later, the warlord's body slumped backward. His helmet looked like it had been punched inward by a god. His lieutenants ran to him, shouting into scanners, confused by the lack of plasma trails. The drone spun wildly in place before broadcasting a different message entirely, Emergency Protocol Omega, sniper threat confirmed. From 1,000 meters away, Rook calmly opened the bolt, pulled the empty casing from the chamber, and flicked it into the grass. Primitive, huh? He muttered, then started walking back into the cabin. Below, panic spread. The Veyari had never lost a soldier on entry. Their armor was supposed to be proof against all primitive kinetic weapons. They built it from star-sent steel, calibrated to absorb shock and reflect thermal blasts. But this was something else. The entrance wound had no burn, no plasma vaporization. It was clean, surgical, and impossibly fast. Their techs couldn't explain it. Their officers couldn't spin it. And their soldiers, for the first time, looked around with fear. In orbit, a Veyari general demanded answers. The ground commander insisted it had been sabotage, not a sniper. Impossible, he said. The humans don't have the optics, the ballistics, the targeting systems. The general leaned forward in his command chair. Then what the hell put a hole in his skull before the sound arrived? Back on Earth, the girl sat beside Rook as he loaded another round. Do you even know how far that shot was? She asked. Rook shrugged. Far enough to make him think twice. Not far enough to make me miss. The girl smiled faintly, but her expression darkened again. They're regrouping. Might come looking for you. Rook glanced out the window. They're welcome to try. I've got enough rounds to write them all a letter. She watched him sharpen the tip of a strange bullet, one etched with a symbol she didn't recognize. Why do you do it? She asked. You don't have to fight. You could have stayed hidden. Rook paused, holding the bullet in his fingers. Then he tapped it against the table once and said, Because someone once said we were too primitive to matter. I made them regret it. Looks like it's time again. Outside, the valley fell into a kind of dead quiet. No more broadcasts. No more jokes. Only the wind moving through pine needles, and somewhere far above, the uneasy silence of an orbiting enemy wondering if Earth had more snipers like him. The truth? It didn't. It only had one. But that was enough. The crater where the alien warlord's head had been wasn't just a tragedy to the Veyari command, it was an anomaly. The forensic drones hovered, collecting fragments from the shattered helmet and scanning for chemical traces, kinetic signatures, anything to explain the impossible. What they found made things worse. There was no energy trail, no heat flash, and most critically, no indication of advanced Earth technology. It had all the characteristics of a conventional ballistic impact, only accelerated to a degree none of their records could account for. One of the engineers, a bright-skinned Veyari named Jurek, stared at the readouts in disbelief. The calculations were off the charts. According to the impact velocity and penetration, the shot had pierced through armor rated against railgun-class strikes using nothing but inertia. When he reported it to the central console, the reply was immediate and scathing. The general above the atmosphere called it a malfunction. Jurek, who had watched his commanding officer's head fold inward like paper, was not so sure. Back on the ridge, Rook sat in the quiet of his shack, cleaning the rifle as if it were a ritual. Each motion was deliberate, every part oiled by hand, no machines, no automation. The young scout, who had introduced herself only as Lyra, stood nearby, watching him work. She had questions but chose them carefully. One finally slipped out. She asked how he had learned to shoot like that. Rook replied without looking up. He said it wasn't about learning, it was about knowing. You either knew the wind, the distance, the angle of light, or you didn't. The rest was just practice. Lyra moved closer to the rifle, examining it under the dim light. The weapon looked like a museum piece. The barrel had been shortened and rethreaded. The stock was carved with strange symbols. There was no digital scope, no AI assistance, not even a rangefinder. Just iron sights and a dial made from salvaged tank components. She picked up one of the bullets lying beside the rifle. It was massive, hand-loaded, with a strange luster that shimmered faintly under light. She asked what it was made of. Rook responded that the core came from a decommissioned satellite, old Earth tech, repurposed. She blinked, surprised. He added that Veyari armor was built to absorb directed energy and plasma, not raw force. If you hit it hard enough, fast enough, in the right place, it buckled like anything else. She asked how he knew that. He smiled and said he'd seen better armor fall. Down in the valley, the Veyari command established a perimeter around the town remains. Troops were repositioned to higher ground, drones swept the tree line, and thermal scans blanketed the hillside. They were hunting ghosts. The term sniper was passed among the ranks like a superstition, not a tactic. The Veyari had fought on dozens of planets and encountered resistance, sure, but this was different. This wasn't just resistance. This was humiliation. The concept that a single unarmored human could drop a decorated Veyari warlord from beyond visual range using outdated equipment was beyond their logic. They didn't realize yet that it wasn't logic they were fighting. It was instinct. Later that day, a challenge signal was sent out by the Veyari. Not a negotiation. A duel. The message was beamed across every human frequency. A single soldier would step forward wearing newly upgraded armor, one even stronger than the last, designed to bait and survive a primitive kinetic strike. If the human sniper existed, they demanded he show himself. A floating drone was dispatched and hovered above the valley floor, its beacon pulsing red every 2 seconds. They wanted to draw Rook out, to catch the second shot, to prove it had all been luck. Lyra read the transmission on a salvage tablet and turned to Rook. She said it was a trap. He nodded, finished screwing the suppressor onto his rifle, and said that was fine. He only needed one more. From a ridge even farther out than the one he had used before, Rook adjusted for altitude. The beacon gave him the perfect range. The Veyari challenger stood tall in polished armor, hands behind his back, projecting confidence. The new helmet had an extra plating layer and adaptive kinetic shielding. It also had a tiny exhaust vent along the lower edge, too small to notice, but just wide enough for Rook's hand-loaded round to kiss. The girl watched him lie prone behind the rocks, her breath shallow. Rook didn't rush. He breathed in, adjusted his shoulder, felt the earth pulse under him, and fired. The new warlord staggered, fell forward, and slammed into the ground. The armor peeled back like fruit skin, and inside was a wound no Veyari medic could fix. The shot had passed through a reinforced girder in the background, through 30 meters of compressed fog, and into the vent. The impact shocked the shielding system so badly it triggered a core feedback that fried the soldier's neural link. Another clean kill. Another impossible shot. The drone froze midair, broadcasting static. The Veyari High Command panicked. 2 kills, 2 perfect shots, 2 confirmed armor failures. The generals debated immediate withdrawal. Others screamed for orbital strikes. But Earth's atmosphere was shielded against bombardment by legacy treaty tech, remnants from old galactic pacts when Earth was still under observation. They couldn't fire from orbit, and every shuttle risked being seen by this ghost marksman. For the first time, the Veyari Legion found itself stuck on a planet where stepping outside meant gambling with your life. Back at the shack, Lyra stared at Rook in awe. He said nothing as he cleaned the barrel. She finally asked, in almost a whisper, how he had made that shot. He told her it wasn't just the bullet, or the gun, or even the math. It was timing. Patience. Knowing when your enemy thinks they're safe. That's when the shot matters most. She nodded, slowly understanding. Then he looked at her, for the first time meeting her eyes directly. He said one day, she might have to take a shot like that. And when she does, she'll feel the earth tilt beneath her, just slightly, right before she fires. It's not nerves. It's the planet helping you line up. She blinked, stunned. He added, that's why it only works if you're quiet. If you listen. That's the part tech can't do. The wind tells you everything. Meanwhile, deep in the Veyari command tent, the remaining officers were analyzing the footage. Over and over they watched the kill frame. One officer whispered that the humans must be using cloaked AI satellites. Another said it had to be teleportation tech. But the engineer, Jurek, stared at the screen and said it wasn't tech at all. It was someone. Someone who knew what he was doing. Someone they couldn't predict. That terrified him more than any weapon. That night, the Veyari called for reinforcements, but the transmission was intercepted. A single Earth-side transmission echoed back instead. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a taunt. Just 3 words. Primitive, but deadly. The wind in the valley had changed. It wasn't something the Veyari scanners could detect, but the soldiers felt it in their posture, in the stiffness of their armor, in the uneasy glances they exchanged during patrols. They were used to being the predators, feared across multiple systems, their technology unchallenged by anything short of a planetary defense array. But this time, it was different. 1 shot had shaken the illusion. 2 had shattered it. The sniper they were trying to dismiss as a backwater anomaly was beginning to feel like a legend in motion. And legends don't follow rules. Inside the Veyari mobile command base, panic was a quiet but rising current. Their top engineers had tested the reinforced armor against concentrated energy bursts, simulated gravitational distortions, and even short-range detonation blasts. None of them had prepared for a hand-loaded, chemically ignited piece of metal traveling so fast and so precise it ignored all of it. The science didn't add up, and the psychological fallout was even worse. Soldiers were starting to question patrols, question their visibility, question every ridge and tree line they passed. Some began requesting leave for sensor fatigue, a term invented just to avoid admitting what they were really afraid of. Being next. Up on the mountain, Rook sat in silence. His rifle lay across his knees, disassembled, as he cleaned each part with a worn cloth. Lyra sat across from him, quietly watching. She was no longer just a frightened girl who had stumbled into his shack begging for help. She had seen what a bullet could do. Not just to armor, but to morale, to power, to fear. She hadn't said a word since the second kill. Rook hadn't either. He didn't talk when he worked. And she was learning not to interrupt the rhythm. The clink of metal against metal, the soft rasp of cloth across steel, the tap of a round being set into its tray. It wasn't a performance. It was preparation. Finally, she asked him the question that had been gnawing at her since the first shot. Why didn't he use modern equipment? Why not a digital scope, or a smart barrel, or heat-seeking rounds? He looked at her for a long time before answering. He said those things make people lazy. They teach you to depend on tech instead of instinct. When tech fails, you panic. When instinct fails, you're already dead. She didn't argue. She simply nodded. Deep down, she knew he was right. The aliens had all the tech in the universe and still couldn't see him. But Rook, with nothing more than a rifle and the wind, could see everything. That same night, the Veyari launched a drone sweep. Dozens of autonomous flyers with infrared scanners and AI-assisted targeting algorithms fanned out across the mountainside, weaving through branches, analyzing every heat signature, listening for acoustic anomalies. To their credit, they did find something. A silhouette near a rock shelf, prone, long object positioned at an angle consistent with sniping. The swarm converged instantly. Plasma bursts lit up the sky, vaporizing the entire ridge segment. Leaves ignited. Smoke rolled down the hills. But Rook wasn't there. When the last drone hovered in to confirm the kill, it transmitted one final image. A dummy. A wooden log wrapped in heat-reflective foil, positioned carefully with a long metal rod angled like a rifle barrel. And etched into the rock beside it, just barely visible in the scan, were 3 scratched words. Not this time. The transmission sparked chaos inside the Veyari command unit. Officers yelled over each other, demanding to know how primitive bait had fooled millions of credits worth of detection equipment. The field commander slammed a console and ordered a full retreat to base perimeter. No more scouting. No more challenges. No more beacons. The sniper wasn't a target anymore. He was a threat. And threats had to be dealt with, not provoked. Lyra watched the explosion from the ridge above, the glow lighting up the night sky. Rook sat beside her, calmly drinking from a battered metal canteen. She asked why he didn't just take the drones out one by one. He said it wasn't about bullets. It was about fear. Let them shoot first. Let them burn empty. Then they start seeing ghosts in the trees. That's when you know you've won. She thought about that for a long moment. It wasn't just about aiming. It was about making them doubt. The next morning, the Veyari broadcast silence. No taunts. No messages. Just dead air. Earth resistance cells took that as a sign to regroup, but many were still too afraid. The stories were spreading too fast. The sniper wasn't just a man anymore. He was being called Earth's ghost, the one who lived in the trees, who spoke only once per shot. The more they didn't see him, the more they believed he was everywhere. Back in the shack, Rook finished loading another set of rounds. Each one was hand-pressed. He didn't trust machines to measure what his fingers could feel. Lyra asked if he was planning to move again. He said no. The next shot wouldn't come from the hills. It would come from below. The enemy thought they were hunting an old man in the mountains. They hadn't even looked at the town they destroyed. That's where he would go next. The ruins. The center. Right where they felt most safe. That evening, he took only his rifle, a small pack, and 3 rounds. Lyra followed him partway down the trail. She asked, if he didn't come back, what should she tell the others? He told her to tell them nothing. Let them wonder. That was half the battle. Then he paused, looked back once, and said if they asked for a name, just say he was the guy who still used iron sights. He disappeared into the dark. Hours later, inside the Veyari command dome, a sudden breach alert triggered. Cameras turned toward the central tower where their secondary communications array had been set up. Standing at the base of it, perfectly still, was a soldier with a weapon they didn't recognize. They zoomed in. It wasn't a Veyari. It was human. Too late. A single shot rang out. The entire array snapped at the base and toppled like a felled tree. The last thing the cameras recorded before the blackout was a glint of light on a rifle barrel, and the words someone had spray-painted on a broken wall nearby, in red. Your armor means nothing here. The explosion of the communications array sent a wave of sparks and fractured energy across the valley floor. The tower folded inward, buckling at the base and collapsing in a cascade of flickering panels and fractured supports. The sound carried for miles, echoing like thunder. Inside the Veyari command dome, every console screamed in alarm. Commanders scrambled, their voices sharp with confusion and rage. The central uplink was supposed to be shielded against sabotage, buried in overlapping defense protocols and monitored by near-perfect surveillance systems. Yet a single human had not only gotten close but destroyed it with one bullet. What unsettled them more than the loss of their equipment was the realization that this lone sniper had chosen that moment, that target, and that shot to humiliate them. He didn't just want them to lose. He wanted them to feel it. Rook didn't wait for the dust to settle. He vanished into the shadows before the patrols arrived. Moving low and without sound, he navigated through the ruins of the town he had once watched from afar. Cracked pavement, scorched tree trunks, broken windows, everything reminded him of what the Veyari had done. The buildings weren't just abandoned, they were defiled. Machinery stolen, homes ransacked, livestock slaughtered without purpose. Even the church bell had been torn down and dragged into the center square like a trophy. He passed the place where the school once stood and stopped for a moment, staring at the scattered chalkboards and desks. He didn't take a photo or leave a message. He just took a breath and kept walking. Meanwhile, the Veyari High Command initiated an emergency override. They dispatched the executioner. Not a rank, not a title, a name feared across dozens of worlds. The executioner was a living weapon. Towering, clad in experimental alloy armor, and linked directly to a semi-sentient railgun, he had never lost a ground engagement. His purpose was not negotiation. It was total eradication. Where traditional soldiers failed, he succeeded by being faster, stronger, and untouchable. When the news reached the soldiers on the ground, some relaxed. Others were silent. They hoped the executioner would do what they could not. But a few, the ones who had seen Rook's work up close, quietly packed personal gear, checked their transport assignments, and began preparing excuses to leave the valley. The executioner descended in a sealed drop pod from orbit, hitting the valley floor like a meteor. The shockwave shattered windows in a 5-block radius. His first action upon exiting was to incinerate a nearby barn simply because its heat signature annoyed him. He then stepped into the square, where Veyari's scouts nervously awaited him. Without speaking, he lifted the railgun on his shoulder and pointed to the hills. The message was clear. That was where he would go. That was where the hunt would end. But Rook wasn't in the hills anymore. He was already below them, moving toward the underground utility lines that once ran beneath the town. He had walked those tunnels years ago, during the last natural flood, when the old mayor had asked for help restoring the grid. Now, he was using them to outmaneuver a species that thought satellite surveillance made them gods. Lyra had helped him set the charges. Not explosives, decoys. Heat packs from old emergency kits, wrapped in metal scraps, buried deep under collapsed roofs. When the executioner began scanning for signatures, he would find 5. Only one would be real. Lyra waited in the cabin, gripping a radio that no longer transmitted but still clicked when touched. She watched the sky for signs of retreat, but none came. Then she heard it, the sound of magnetic coils charging. A hum, like air being squeezed between two stones. The executioner was powering up. On the ridge, soldiers moved out of the way. No one wanted to be too close to him. They followed at a distance, less like a squad and more like a funeral procession waiting to find out whose name was next. Rook surfaced near the edge of town, rising slowly from beneath a pile of debris where a butcher shop once stood. His rifle was already assembled. He lay flat on a section of cracked tile, aimed at nothing yet. He wasn't waiting for the target. He was watching the shadows. He listened for the rhythm of metal boots and the telltale high-pitched resonance that followed the executioner wherever he went. Then he saw it. A distortion in the air, barely visible, like heat rising off asphalt. The armor cloaked certain frequencies, but not all. Rook adjusted his dial, took a breath, and didn't move. The executioner entered the kill zone. His armor bristled with layered shielding. His helmet had no eyes, just sensors and an internal HUD linked to a processor the size of a car engine. The railgun pivoted once, scanning for the highest thermal reading. It locked on to one of the decoys. Rook's hand tightened. As expected, the executioner fired without checking. The blast tore through a collapsed house and vaporized half a wall, revealing nothing but foil and rocks. A mistake, small but telling. The machine wasn't patient. It was efficient. But efficiency could be baited. Rook moved 5 degrees left, not aiming at the helmet. That was the mistake the Veyari assumed he'd make. Instead, he focused on the neck joint, where the armor met the flex casing of the power regulator. A hair-thin seam exposed when the railgun raised above the shoulder. He waited. Not for a command. Not for a confirmation. Just for the executioner to turn slightly. When he did, Rook's shot fired like a whisper on the wind. The bullet traveled so fast it split the air. It struck the seam exactly as predicted, punching through the reinforced polymer and into the regulator chamber. There was no explosion. There was a pause. Then the executioner's body seized, the lights in his armor flickered, and the railgun collapsed sideways. He staggered once, took 2 slow steps, then dropped to one knee. For the first time in recorded history, the executioner was on the ground. Not disabled. Not rebooting. Done. Rook didn't watch him fall. He was already gone. By the time the Veyari reached the body, silence had taken hold of the valley. No broadcasts. No sniper. Just a single shell casing lying on the tiles, with faint grooves carved into its side. They translated it later, with full linguistic scans. It said one thing. Through armor. That night, the Veyari command made their decision. Not to fight. To leave. Every available shuttle was called. Units withdrew from every outpost. No celebration. No honor. Just extraction. They did not speak of the sniper in their official reports. They classified everything. But the soldiers who had survived knew. And the ones who returned home told stories in quiet bars and broken voices. Not about Earth's weapons. but about one man. One rifle. And a silence so absolute it could kill. The Veyari ships left in the dead of night, one by one, breaking atmosphere without ceremony. No honor banners. No music. No closing speeches about conquest or legacy. Just the dull thrum of engines and the rising panic of a retreat masked as tactical relocation. The few ground soldiers who remained to clean up the last equipment didn't speak to one another. They didn't have to. The silence between them said it all. The sniper had broken them. Not with brute strength or superior technology, but with something far older. Patience. Precision. Fear. Orbiting above, the Veyari Senate held an emergency inquiry. Transmission after transmission was played, each documenting failure after failure. Analysts dissected the footage of the executioner falling to his knees, the sparks from his armor dying out like a campfire in the wind. The sniper was never caught on any visual log. No clear footage. No retinal imprint. Just effects. The smoking wreckage. The limp bodies. The perfect kills. A senator slammed his clawed fist on the table and demanded to know how a species labeled as pre-interstellar had managed to defeat an elite invasion force with a single projectile weapon. A war technician, shaking slightly, explained that the armor had never been tested against raw kinetic impact without energy interference. They had simply assumed it wouldn't be necessary. One file remained locked. It required triple clearance. Once opened, it showed a translated phrase scratched into the side of a building, the same one seen in a drone image before the uplink tower was destroyed. Your armor means nothing here. The room went still. One of the older senators leaned back and murmured something about Earth being marked Class Green in the archives. He asked when that designation was last updated. The reply came back quietly. It hadn't been updated in 73 cycles. The vote passed unanimously. Earth was to be reclassified. Effective immediately, Earth was no longer considered a resource world. It was listed as red. No further contact. No invasion. No trade. No approach. The sniper had ended not just a battle, but a future. Lyra stood at the edge of the burned valley, watching the last of the alien ships disappear into the sky. She held the old rifle in her hands now. Rook had left it behind in the cabin, along with 3 rounds and a hand-carved tag that read in shaky lettering "Old tools still work." She had looked for him for 2 days. Through the forests, along the rivers, across the hills. Nothing. No boot prints. No notes. Not even the shell casings. It was like he had vanished into the land. Some of the resistance fighters believed he never existed, that he was a myth made up to give people hope. But Lyra knew better. She had seen him work. She had watched him shoot. And she had listened when he spoke about the wind and the stillness and the moment before the world changes. A week later, the valley began to recover. Survivors came back. Engineers from other towns helped rebuild the grid. The scorched earth softened, and the silence slowly gave way to footsteps and voices again. But something had changed in all of them. Not just the relief of survival, but a respect for what had kept them alive. No one touched the cabin. No one repurposed the rifle. And when people walked through the ruins, they did so with a kind of reverence, like they were stepping through the story that had saved them. In another part of the world, a new military unit was being formed under Earth's Unified Defense Command. A special operations branch not based on numbers or machines, but on skill. A human-only initiative focused entirely on long-range warfare, wilderness survival, and enemy disruption through non-digital means. It was called Project Ghost. The first training manual had a quote on the first page. It read, "Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of danger." No author listed. Meanwhile, deep inside an old Earth satellite relay system, something triggered a dormant file. It was an encrypted message, decades old, tagged with a call sign that hadn't been used since the last terrestrial war. The message played once, distorted and faint. A voice said one confirmed kill. Interstellar target. Extraction denied. Standing order remains. Disappear. Then the file deleted itself permanently. In a remote facility, a retired general sat reading the latest classified reports. He had seen hundreds of battles, but none like this. He read about the impossible shot through the armor, the one that had destroyed the Veyari's most advanced weapon without any warning. He smiled, remembering the man who had once sat across from him in a tent during a winter storm, refusing to use a thermal scope because it gave away position. That same man had been declared too unpredictable, too independent. So they let him go. Not dishonorably. Just quietly. The general folded the report and whispered to the empty room, "We were lucky he came back." In distant parts of the galaxy, whispers of Earth began to spread. Not as a war zone, but as a cursed planet. A place where soldiers vanished. Where armor didn't protect. Where silence hunted you from the trees. Pirates marked their maps with warning symbols. Mercenaries told tales in low voices about the mountain with the man who never missed. They said he wasn't human, or that he used forgotten weapons made from old Earth gods. It didn't matter. The result was the same. Earth became a ghost story. Lyra, now wearing the uniform of Earth's new sniper corps, stood on a fresh ridge, training recruits. They were young, eager, and full of questions. She didn't give long speeches. She simply handed them a rifle and pointed toward the forest. Then she told them one thing. You're not here to fight. You're here to be invisible. If they know you're there, you've already lost. One of the recruits asked if the stories were true, about the man who shot through armor and disappeared without a trace. Lyra smiled, looking at the wind rolling through the trees. She said he wasn't a man. He was a message. And somewhere, in a part of the forest no one dared enter, an old boot print still pressed into the dirt. Alone. Unmoving. A mark left by someone who had done the unthinkable, then walked away without asking for thanks. The forest had grown over it, mostly. But not all the way. Not yet. Like the land itself remembered who had walked there, and what silence had cost.